Okay, welcome to Bâtonnage Connect. Today our panel is titled Ladies, Let's Start Talking. And I'm really excited about this. It plays in well with the panel or the breakout session that we had yesterday about limiting beliefs and pen to paper. We talked about, for those of you who joined us or who didn't, we talked about, our voices and how we think about our voices and how we would like our voices to be. So I thought that played in really well with what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. You are all muted. You have your videos off. You have two methods of communication, which we encourage you to use. We can't be together in person, but we've had some great interaction in the chats, and so we hope we continue to do that today. And so the chat section is more for your interaction with each other, with your peers. And then the Q&A section, those are questions that you would like to pose to our panelists. So we'll be monitoring that, Rebecca, Ella, and I on the back end, and we'll make sure that the panel gets to those today. And then if any do not get answered during the time, then we'll go ahead and do a follow-up email. And so you'll get those comments in a follow-up email. So today, if you have any issues with your streaming or, if you get logged out, just log back in, maybe try a different browser. Firefox, Google Chrome work really well. And hope you enjoy this panel. I'm gonna go ahead and introduce our moderator. We did have one panelist that was unable to make it today, Julia Cosgrove. She's very much a part of our Bâtonnage community still, but sadly wasn't able to join us today. And Erin will introduce our other two fabulous panelists. She is the managing editor for Wine Business Monthly and has been with the company since 2012. And in addition to production responsibilities for the monthly trade magazine, she writes about business, technology, sales and marketing, and also oversees content for WBM's 8 conferences. So she speaks on industry trade trends at numerous conferences, including the Unified Wine and Grape Symposium and the World Bulk Wine Exhibition, and guest lectures on wine, media, and public relations. Erin has served as a judge in the Concours Mondial de Brussels since 2016 and at the Central Coast Wine Competition. She earned her Bachelor of Arts from Sonoma State University in Communications with a journalism emphasis, and she's one of my favorite people. So I'll turn it over to you, Erin.
Thank you, Katie. Before we begin, I just want to thank the entire Bâtonnage team, Katie, Rebecca, Ella, Stevie, and Sarah, for putting together an incredible conference and a program, and for bringing this panel together. It's a real honor to be a part of this group of amazing women and the entire Bâtonnage community. And it's even more immensely humbling to be here facilitating a discussion about one of my favorite topics, communication. There's a lot that we could cover this morning, from day-to-day communication, negotiation, conflict resolution, the very dynamics that come into play with family businesses and conglomerations, and I could go on and on with that. But at the heart of what we'll discuss today is the fact that proper communication is essential to our professional and personal relationships. And quite often it becomes conflated with conflict. We don't usually have a discussion about communication until there's a problem. Usually the lack of it, or a miscommunication, or the fact that you have to have a really tough conversation. So unfortunately, it's pretty easy to err in this area. I know I'm guilty of not stating my thoughts clearly, or not reaching out properly, or letting my emotions get the best of me, particularly in a heated discussion. And as women, it's doubly hard because in addition to not getting it right sometimes, we're also fighting stigmas and stereotypes and our own fears and limiting beliefs every time we negotiate salary, stand up for our work, push our colleagues, or critique someone else's work. We've been judged or even reprimanded for doing our jobs and for stating our opinion. I know that I still get nervous before having to say no, or when I have to have a tough conversation with a writer, simply because I've been burned in this area in the past. And I don't think I'm alone in that. But thankfully, I always come back to the fact that we can learn from our missteps, and with some practice and perspective, anyone can become a better communicator. Our panelists today, two wonderful women who are experts in facilitating conversation and conveying a strong message, are going to share their stories and their practices in a very open and honest conversation. So without further ado, let me introduce you to these two fantastic ladies, each who have great histories. Felicity Carter is the editor-in-chief of Meiningers Wine Business International, the world's only global English language wine business magazine. Published in Europe, it has subscribers in more than 35 countries. A regular wine judge, Felicity has judged in countries from Brussels to Georgia, and in 2015 formed part of the Empowerment of Women in Wine panel for Wines of Argentina. Felicity is a regular keynote speaker at wine events from Hong Kong to Verona, but before taking her current position, she wrote for major Australian publications, including the Sydney Morning Herald. Allison Parc is an award-winning entrepreneur and noted public speaker as the founder and president of Brenne Whiskey and a partner at Samson Surrey. She is one of the leading American entrepreneurs in the world whiskey segment, having created Brenne from scratch in the heart of cognac. In 2017 and 18, she was named World Whiskey Brand Ambassador USA of the Year by Whiskey Magazine's Icons of Whiskey, becoming the first woman to receive the award. She is a respected speaker on the topics of entrepreneurship, sales, dramatic career changes, and thriving in male-dominated industries. So let's start off with probably one of the lighter topics surrounding communication and talk about understanding communication styles, which are critical to being an effective communicator, because often it's not really about us, it's about the person we're talking to. So Allison, let's start with you. How do you determine what someone's communication style is?
Yeah, pretty simply, I let someone else tell me, right? I just ask them, hey, what's the best way for you to receive the information I'm going to share with you? And it works almost every time.
Yeah, Felicity?
Okay, so I work a lot across cultures, and the axis of communication that's most important is whether somebody is direct or indirect about the way they speak. And you can pick that up pretty quickly. If somebody is blunt and to the point, it means when you speak to them, you have to get to the point. If somebody is more indirect, there's somebody that talks a lot more in euphemisms, maybe perhaps speaks more passively, takes a lot longer to get to the point. With those people, if you're blunt and direct, they'll think that you're rude and cold. So you need to take more time before you get to the point. Whereas if you do that with somebody who's very direct, you'll just annoy them and they'll think you're a time waster. So I think as a basis, listen to somebody about how quickly they get to the point, and that will tell you a lot about their communication style.
Yeah, we have a little bit of experience with that. I know there are a lot of these communication type assessments out there,
Yeah.
Personality assessments, and some of them you can take or leave. Some of them are more popular than others, but I've found that even using some of those, especially in a larger organization, can be incredibly helpful, right? I'm very direct.
Yes.
And to the point, as the two of you learned as we were putting this panel together. I like to cut to the chase, but I work with others who, they want to talk for 20 minutes about, what they did over the weekend or some of the other projects that they're working on. And that's been a real eye-opener for me, because we used something called the HBDI assessment. And now I kind of categorize everybody, right? I know when I'm speaking to somebody that's a red, they're wanting to kind of shoot the shit a little bit, right? We want to talk a little bit ahead of time. And I'm talking to somebody else who's more data driven and blue. Okay, I need to just hear all the options, right? And I need to cut directly to that. So that's, another way of thinking about communication styles if you have that luxury.
Yes. I mean, what you've just said is another really important point, is that some people are driven by data and some people are driven by emotions and life experience. And you cannot use data to convince somebody who's emotion-based of a decision. You have to tell them a story about somebody else who used it and how well it worked, and vice versa.
Yeah, you're more likely to get your point across and get whatever it is you need a little bit sooner, I think. So my question for the two of you, now, if you're kind of understanding somebody else's communication style, what happens when those two styles clash? What happens when you get somebody who's too data-driven and somebody who's too emotion-driven, and they don't necessarily want to work together? How do you get around that?
That's a really good question. Basically, okay, so in any conversation, if it's to do with work, you need to set up parameters and you need to set up guidelines of what you expect the outcome to be. And sometimes you just have to let people, sort themselves out. If it's you involved in a conversation where the other person has a completely different style, what you need to do is you need to be very active listening and ask them questions to make sure you've understood their point. Sometimes I find if I'm getting really baffled, that's a clue that I'm talking to somebody who's got a completely different communication style to me. And that's where you start using questions to find out just what they're on about.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think also if it's you and the other person, there's, you can get really clear in how you invite them into a conversation. Right. And you can be, as Felicity said, just genuinely curious in your listening. Right. So you're not just listening for the sake of listening, but you want to be actively listening and you want to be genuinely curious about them. And I also think, especially if you're clashing, if your communication style is a little bit clashing, or even if you're coming at, the same point from two very different sides, I think there's a lot of value in saying, I heard you say blank. Did I get that right? And it's nice to be able to reflect back to someone and go, okay, this is what I heard. Did I get that right? Cool. Okay. I have another perspective. And then ask them, are you open to hearing it? Right? Because then if you just go, okay, yeah, but what about this? They might be shut off to hearing it, and they might just be still thinking that they have to either defend or argue or support or go down their own journey. And as awkward as it feels to sometimes be like, are you open to hearing this? I've had a lot of success with that, because the moment I ask, it puts them to say, yeah, I am. And then just subconsciously they go, I'm actually open to hearing another perspective. And their listening improves too.
Wonderful. So when I think about communication styles clashing, and Felicity, you've touched on this a little bit, I want to dive a little deeper into cultural approaches to communication, right? In an increasingly global workforce, and one where we now have more opportunities to interact with people in other countries, how do you take those types of work cultures into consideration?
I think there's three very distinct things that you need to understand about other cultures. And the first and the most important one is where they sit on the direct to indirect spectrum. So if you're doing work in Southeast Asia, you may not be direct. The doors will just slam in your face. So if you work somewhere like, say, Indonesia, you don't go directly to the person. You go to their assistant and you say, do you think Mr. Mineral Water would be interested in talking to me about this? And then they come back and they say yes. If you're doing work in Holland, on the other hand, you get straight to the point. And people can be, if you say to your Dutch friend, how do I look in this dress? And she goes, you look like a fat cow. She's not insulting you. She's making sure you don't go out in the street looking awful. And you must not be upset by that. So direct or indirect is very important to understand. The second one is you need to understand different cultures' idea of time. So for example, if you need something done quickly, in Hong Kong, you can get something turned around the same day and they'll think you're really lazy if you don't get back to them instantly. If you're dealing with an Italian company, don't try and get something done in a week. You've got to give them a really long timeline, or and also respecting things like if you're dealing with somebody in Hong Kong, you can contact them any time of the day or night. And it's true in America as well. But in Europe, if you contact somebody during the summer holidays, they'll just think that you're really rude and uncouth. And the other really important thing is understand the difference in what an agreement means in a different culture. So often in Anglo-Saxon culture, we throw ideas around. We'll say something like, yeah, I'd love to get together with you, sometime. And what we mean is, yeah, maybe not. We haven't committed to it. But if you say that in Central Europe, then somebody is going to expect a formal invitation. And if you don't issue it, they'll be really pissed off. And my final point is sometimes you can actually use your foreignness as a secret weapon. So sometimes when I'm interviewing French people, for example, all French people think all Australians are sort of barbarians. They're really surprised to find out that we can use knives and forks. And what this means is that if I want to ask somebody really tough questions, which a French person couldn't ask, if I want to find out about their finances or something, they actually take it from me because they just figure I'm a barbarian and that's fine. So there are times when you can be really American and whatever, and it will actually work in your favor, where you shouldn't worry too much about the other culture.
I'm smiling and laughing through that because as an American, I make whiskey in France. And oh my goodness, yes to everything you just said, Felicity. And, I think also I think, first of all, Felicity, I love listening to you. You just come up with these very, very clear bullet points. I think it's also helpful to remember there's like a percentage of failure in here, and it's okay.
Yes.
Try again.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot of failure. And I feel like my learnings in communicating with different cultures has been lots of pain, lots of failure, pick myself up, dust myself off, try again, and don't just try again, obviously, in the same way. And I say obviously because just saying that, you go, oh, okay, of course. And yet in practice, as someone who prides herself on communication, I have absolutely tried things again and again. And then I go, did I literally just, did I just do that in the exact same way every time, right? So you have to also be able to step out and hear yourself in how you're approaching, even if you think I'm going to try it differently this time. It's good to check in with yourself, make sure that you are, and then also find people who have been very successful in communicating and doing business with whatever kind of group you're trying to work with, and ask them, hey, when I've approached this person or when I've approached this team in this place, I've been met with some resistance. Do you have any tips, any advice? And that is how I've had a lot of my own breakthroughs. And honestly, sometimes the advice has just been, you're doing everything right. Just know that you're not going to get the results in the timeliness that makes you feel satisfied. Just excellent.
Yeah. When I first started working in Europe, I was talking to somebody who works overseas a lot, and he did say, it doesn't matter how hard you try and how polite you are going to do something in somebody else's culture which is going to anger or annoy them. That's just part of and you'll be really upset when you do it, but you just have to forgive yourself.
Yeah, that's something I've learned over the years too on some of these press tours and conferences. And Allison, thank you for saying you're going to fail, because Lord knows I've failed a couple of times, not intentionally, obviously, but I have found, and I found 2 books that have really helped me with this. And I reread the sections on these countries or on these cultures before I go on any international trip. The first one is The Culture Map by Erin Meyer. It's been incredibly helpful for me, specifically to some of the points that you mentioned, Felicity, in understanding directness, agreements, negotiations, those types of things. And also The Culture Code by, and I'm probably going to butcher his name, Clotaire Rapaille. He's a marketer, and it's a lot about how you market a certain product in different countries and cultures, right? So alcohol means one thing in America, but it means something else in Italy. Or a car is one thing here and different somewhere else. And both of those have been really helpful for me in kind of adjusting my communication style and doing sort of a check before I fly over there. And I found those to be 2 absolutely.
They sound great, actually. I might get that latter one that you said. That sounds really useful.
I have Culture Code in that stack.
Felicity, I will send it to you. It's
great.
It's an older book, but it's fantastic. Perfect. So we've talked about some of the more specific communication challenges, I would say. Allison, I know you've mentioned that you have some best practices for communicating with others that should apply absolutely no matter what. Could you dive into a couple of those?
Yeah, and thank you. When you and I were talking earlier, we were kind of focusing on when you have a challenging conversation, because just like you said in your intro, that's really when people start to pay a little bit better attention to their communication style. And again, the asterisk here is when I tell you what I kind of like, the way I try and go into some of this stuff, don't think for a second that I'm as calm as I may look right now, even, like I'll be sweating, I'm like, whatever. But that's kind of part of it, right? I'm a passionate person and your adrenaline's in, and sometimes you feel like a lot's on the line. And with that, I try and have my hardest conversations on video or in person. And I personally may not want to do that, but I do know that it's really important for you to be able to read their micro expressions and their big expressions, and vice versa, right? And then also, as someone who definitely wears her heart on her sleeve and her emotions all over her face, below the camera or even under the table, I give myself, I call it like my physical release button, and I'll just for me, I just dig a thumbnail into a palm and I press, and it helps me if I really want to be angry with my face or something, or have an emotion on my face that I don't necessarily want the person on the other side of the table to see. I'll just kind of press it, and I can put all my little tension right into my thumb. And then also, I think as much as possible, I consistently try and remind people on the call or in person, you know, the shared and already agreed upon goal. Right? What are we already, we are in agreement that we are collaborating to make this the best brand possible. Okay, so let's refresh, let's take a breath there, and then go back in. And then I also, you know, sometimes you do it when you're in the middle of a really hard conversation. You have to kind of remind people to take a breath and remind them that, like, you know, greatness really comes sometimes from friction and from these intersecting points of two different sides of a thought process. So, you know, while it might feel sticky and hard and complex and uncertain in the moment, that's also where kind of creative brilliance, beauty, and excitement and success can come from.
Absolutely.
I've only really got one piece of advice about difficult conversations, and that's make sure you stick to the subject and that you don't get derailed. As the temperature rises and people get angry, they start piling more issues into the conversation, and that's extremely destructive. And the other reason to stick to the subject is if you're dealing with somebody who's a skills negotiator, like somebody on the other end of a sales call, or somebody who wants to kind of disorient you because they'll get an advantage, the more that you can refuse to engage in anything other than the topic in hand, the better that you'll be. And, you know, and also listen to their points and all of that, but keep bringing it back to what you're talking about. Don't get derailed. I think that's really, really important.
Totally agree.
Yeah. Well, as someone who, like Allison, I wear my emotions on my face, and, you know, especially on some of these bigger conversations, tougher conversations, I tend to get a little heated. I can feel, you know, like the heat rising in my chest and the blood starting to boil. Allison, you mentioned, you know, you dig your thumb into the palm of your hand. Felicity, any tips or tricks to kind of help temper your emotion a little bit in the
Well, interestingly, sometimes emotion can be a really powerful guide to something that's going on. One of the most interesting things is sometimes in a conversation the words are something, but if you find yourself getting angry, quite often what's happened is a boundary has been violated somehow. And I think if you find yourself getting unexpectedly angry in a conversation, it's something that you absolutely should pay attention to, because it usually is a sign that the other person has just tried to pull an underhand trick or is trying to get one over you. Now, that doesn't mean you should express your anger. You know, sometimes just things like, can you walk away for 5 minutes or whatever, or even, you know, but the best thing to do is to be honest with yourself and ask yourself why you're getting angry. It's often a clue that you should stop for a second, and the other person may not be arguing in good faith. If they are, if it's just the temperature just going higher and higher, take a break, or just insist on sticking to the subject. That's a really good way to bring things, you know, to get a resolution.
And if that boundary is crossed, is that something you communicate after the fact? You maybe take some time to cool off, essentially? And
no. Sometimes if you get angry, anger's a really, really interesting insight. Especially if you suddenly get angry and it comes from nowhere, it's a sign that you may be reacting to something that you need to react to. So first of all, ask yourself, why? Calm down, you know, whatever. But whatever it is that's made you angry, make sure you deal with it on the spot. Don't let it fester. And anger is we're all terrified of anger because, you know, it can spiral or whatever. But sudden anger in a conversation that doesn't seem to warrant it is often a very, very important signal that somebody is trying to violate a boundary. Maybe it's an ethical boundary, or they're asking you to do something which is beyond what they should be asking you to do. But just always stop for a second and ask yourself why you've suddenly got angry.
Yeah, and I would add to that also, just if you are angry and just in addressing it in that moment, I think once you understand what you're angry about, why you're angry about it may not be something to address right then and there, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, true.
And you might just need to pin that, and then again, go back to that focus of the 1 to 3 points that is really the point of that intent of conversation. Because I also have been in conversations, and Felicity, I'm sure you have too, and Erin, where someone might say something because they possibly know a button that they can press for you, just to get you angry, just to take you off the topic or the focus, right? So it's kind of an amazing game of trying to see all the moving parts and pieces, and also see yourself on that game board as well.
Yeah, and honestly, some people use this as a real tactic. I've been in disputes I was in a dispute in China, and you know, they are master negotiators. It's quite incredible. It's a game, and people have actually learned how to, you know, how to get you offside or to anger you or whatever. And so people can play you. And if you're in a negotiation that has to do with money, and you suddenly find that you're getting angry or you're getting emotional, watch out. Somebody has just, you know, you may just have been being played. So I think your emotions can be a really valuable insight, especially in negotiations.
I love this topic about emotion in conversation, because it brings up the question of tone as well. Emotion and tone, at least in my mind, kind of go hand in hand, especially since, you know, if you take on a strong tone or an emotional tone as a woman, that's not necessarily, there's a stereotype and a stigma that we're angry or bitchy or bossy. It's never strong or authoritative, right? Allison, could you talk a little bit more about tone and how that plays into having some of these tougher conversations?
Yeah, I love Caitlin just put in the chat, currently dealing with this at work. I hear you, Caitlin. First of all, I think, you know, you have to also choose for yourself how much you want to stereotype to penetrate your way of showing up in the world. And also with tone, I sometimes, especially if I'm going into a negotiation or a really important presentation where I know I'm going to get pushback, I'll do a voice memo a couple times the night before to myself, just to hear how I'm going to sound for them about some of my key points, right? And then, because you all know, you could say, I really need to talk to you about the sales numbers, or, hey, I really need to talk to you about the sales numbers. And however you deliver that, someone is going to respond. And it's important sometimes to remember that something that may feel really significant to you might not feel so significant to the receiver. And whether or not you need to make them also feel like it's significant or not, right? You have to kind of just understand what emotion your tone may inspire for the other person to feel walking into a conversation. And for me, I like to keep things, even the serious things, you know, just open and approachable, because I don't want people to feel like they're coming into a conversation like this or in like big defense, right? Just like, everything's open, not really pleased with the numbers, you know, let's have a conversation about it. And then they go, okay, and come into it.
I just want to pick up on those words that you used, cold, bitch. The other one that gets thrown around a lot is difficult women. Those are words that are weapons used against women's authority. Whenever you hear those used, what somebody is actually saying is, I don't want you to tell me what to do. And I think in any conversation, I think you have two responsibilities. One is you have a responsibility to be a decent human being who's acting in good faith. So no passive aggression, no buried insults, no sarcasm, you know, don't be an asshole. And the second thing is clear communication. Now, if you've done those two things, you're not an asshole and you've communicated clearly, then you've actually done your job. And how somebody feels about what you've just said becomes their responsibility. And I think as women, we often believe that we're responsible for other people's emotional reactions, whereas I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a licensed therapist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't be responsible for somebody else's emotional reaction, which may have nothing to do with what I said. So I think, you know, unless you're, you know, if you're in a very difficult negotiation, I mean, in a normal conversation, your responsibility is don't be an asshole and be clear. And that's where your responsibility stops. And if somebody calls you a difficult woman or a bitch, they probably have an agenda that has nothing to do with what you just said. So I think that's really important to bear in mind.
That's a great reminder. And it's a really hard lesson to learn and internalize, right? I know, especially early on in my career, having difficult conversations with writers, you know,
yeah,
that's another story. We could do a whole hour on.
Yeah, we could talk about this afterwards.
But you know, providing a critique of their work, you know, I'm trying to be as nice as possible, you know, set out the tone. I'm not trying to do this to be mean. I just want to help you have the best article possible. I know my publication well, and yet I still get called some names, right? That has happened in the past. And it's really hard to not internalize that, to this day, 7 years later, it's still, I still take it a little personally.
So something I have, like a little tool I use in my back pocket, when someone tells me something, right, that I kind of, oh, that stung a little bit, I think of what could someone say to me that I would be like, that's a weird thing to say and it would never affect me, right? Like whatever, like, whatever that is, whatever comment they might possibly say that would have no effect on you whatsoever. And then whenever I hear that other thing that makes me go sting, I might explore it. Okay, am I getting stung because I actually think there might be some validity to this? And if not, like Felicity said, did I do my job? Was I clear in communication? Did I check all the box? Great. Then I just go, oh, you know what? They just told me that thing. And it does help me. Like, for example, it's, I don't know, what's like, oh, you just seem like a person who would like wear flower crowns all the time. Like, okay, like that has no meaning to me, right? So if they say something that I go, oh, that stung a little bit, I'll be like, oh, they just told me I have a lot of flower crowns. Okay, and it's just like a little mind game that I play really fast just to get myself out of pain and being smaller and still standing powerfully into who I am and how I need to be in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So as much as we prepare for these tougher conversations, as much as we practice on video, I think we got to the point that these are still stressful conversations, right? And words can be said that can't be taken back, and tones can be used, and we can be reprimanded or yelled at. They're pretty stressful, right? These types of conversations. Felicity, I think you've interviewed a doctor who had some expertise in this, yes. And I think even though it's the medical field, it really applies here.
Yeah, I interviewed, really early in my career, I had a conversation which has always stayed with me. Doctors, especially who work in emergency or intensive care, often have to give extremely bad news. And it actually traumatizes the person who's giving the news. So this doctor had set up a facility in a Sydney hospital to get doctors to work with actors to teach them how to break bad news. And he had three principles which are really useful. And the first principle is, if you have bad news to tell, don't be euphemistic, don't beat about the bush, say it. So don't go up to somebody and say, your son's not looking very well. It could be terminal, but, we'll do it. You have to say, your son is going to die. And it has to be that clear, because the person will go into shock and they need to process the minimum amount of words possible. Then what happens when you've delivered bad news to somebody is they're going to have an emotional reaction, which can go from being very shocked to being angry and raging, or to be weeping. Now, as decent human beings, our first thing that we want to do is we want to cheer them up and make them feel better. So what we do is what he called taking back the bad news, which is when you rush in and you go, well, look, where there's life, there's hope. Not everybody always dies. We'll do our best, whatever. And then you're in a whole world of pain, because first of all, the person thinks to themselves, oh, okay, so there is a possibility, and maybe the doctors can make my son stay alive. And when your son subsequently dies, they can then sue the hospital. So it's very, very important that you deliver the bad news and then you let the emotional reaction happen as it is. Now, we don't do anything in wine that's that serious, but there will be times when you have to say, I'm sorry, we've just lost our biggest client, or we've just lost the vintage to frost, or, the delivery truck has crashed. And even though they're much smaller things, or you might have to say to an employee, I'm sorry, we have to let you go. And that's a traumatizing conversation for you to have. So what you need to do is, if you have the luxury of knowing that it's coming up in advance, rehearse it. Go through it with somebody and so that you take the emotion and trauma out of it yourself. And then go straight to the point. I'm sorry, we have to let you go. And then stand back and let the person deal with it. Don't jump in and try and make them better, because then, you can get into all kinds of pain for a whole lot of reasons. And I found that a really useful tip.
Absolutely. All right, so let's continue this conversation about the tough conversations, especially in the wine industry now. There are a lot of conversations being had about challenging the status quo, and that's something that all organizations at some point need to take a look at. If people are desiring a change within their organization, how do they make that known? What advice would you give? Allison, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Yeah, it's a really good question. One, I think, be clear for yourself if what you have is a seed or a kernel of an idea or a fully fleshed plan or somewhere on that spectrum, right? And then I think when you're sharing that with people, you can let them know, hey, this is a seed of an idea, or I've actually developed a full plan around this and a strategy behind this. I'm still open to, like, you know, greater development. So first, for yourself, just kind of know where your desires are, or if it is just a desire, but then try and put a little action to that, or an action plan. Also, find your allies within the organization, right? See who else might share that viewpoint or that opinion, and ask them, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time, and just bounce something off of you. And then also just, like, watch your time to make sure you actually honor that, whatever you just invited them into, right? But, you know, talk it over with them and say, hey, you know, what do you think about this? And then is there a CEO or a president or some other person or some higher up that you want to bring this to? You can ask them, if I'm going to present this to someone, what do you think? Do you have any, you know, can you think of what they might say as a pushback? And then you should know that for yourself and be ready to have a response to that, right? But I think kind of knowing where you are and you're thinking about it, having some allies, talking it through, sharing it, and also being fully aware that what you might get is, oh, that sounds nice, thank you so much, and then they kind of shut the door, right? And that's okay. That just means you get a new opportunity to try it again, and maybe try it again in a slightly different way.
I agree with all of that. I think also when you're talking to organisations, you need to present new ideas in the form of either risk or reward. So at the moment, if you're an organisation that doesn't have any diversity or whatever, your organisation is at risk. And you need to say to somebody, look, we have to do something about this, because this is going to come back to haunt us, especially if we look very exclusive and elitist. And the second thing is to talk about the reward, which is to sort of say, look, businesses that are more diverse perform better, and maybe we need some new ideas, maybe we need somebody to help us connect with new audiences. So always put it in terms of what it means for the business. What are the risks of not doing it or doing something else, and what are the rewards? And you can make an argument that way.
Excellent. I love all these points. I know something that I've been watching and kind of experiencing over the years in the wine industry is a younger generation coming in with newer ideas, and having that conversation of, well, yes, we've always done it this way and it's worked in the past, but now I want to challenge your construct, right? I want to point out, yeah, that worked then. It's still kind of working now, but in order to move into the future, I think this is what we should be doing. This is how this business will be propelled forward. Any advice for those types of conversations, specifically around an organization that may be incredibly hesitant to change? Yeah.
I mean, I'll just say, I think it's important to remember your audience, right? And try and stand in their shoes and get a sense of how they might receive your offer of an idea, and then also have some examples, and maybe they're examples from outside of your industry, and then maybe at least one example of inside of your industry, and then as best as you can, put some data behind it, right? We see companies with diverse boards have exponentially X% more increase in gross revenue. That's great. Like, get some data, as Felicity said, that either shows the reward and shows the possibility, or shows the risk. So.
Yeah, I think the other thing to remember about the wine industry specifically is, the wine industry is all about conviviality and hospitality. It's stacked to the rafters with genuinely really decent individuals. And so I think most people really, really want change to happen. It's just sometimes people don't know how to make it happen. So if you can come in with some enthusiasm and some ideas, I can't believe that most people aren't interested in having that conversation. What people don't want is, they don't want to be told that they're doing bad or they're whatever without the path out. So if you can come up with the pathway to it, I think this is a moment where people are really open and hoping for some ideas about how to deal with this.
This brings up a great point, and I think, Felicity, you had a fantastic term for this when you're trying to deliver some news that we were talking about yesterday, right?
The technical term.
Change, and here's the way forward, right? What was that term?
Oh, it's technically called a shit sandwich. All right. So editors use this all the time when you're giving feedback, right? So you couch the bad stuff inside either ends of good stuff. So especially if you're giving employee reviews or you're telling a writer that their work needs a bit of work, you go, this is such a great idea. Look, your enthusiasm is fantastic. I really want to commend you for that. You could really improve this if you just dealt with a few things here, and then you outline them. And then in the end you go, but, well done. Thanks for your enthusiasm. And anyway, so that is a great technique.
Excellent. All right. When talking about change in an organization, for me, I think a little bit about negotiation. It's say, okay, well, we want to do this. What do we have to give up in order to make that happen? And so I know negotiation is something that's very tough for a lot of women, especially younger women. I know when I first started out, negotiating salary was a terrifying prospect. I was just, you want to offer me that? Okay, yeah, that's fine. But let's talk a little bit about that subject. I think that's kind of our last communication topic we haven't gotten to yet. Allison, why don't you kick it off? What are some of your pro ideas for negotiations?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways you can think about this. So just for the sake of being on a Zoom panel, I'll try and button it up. One, we all know your worth, know comparable positions and everything like that, within your industry. And I always try and understand, like, what are your measures? It's two different things if you are applying for a new job or negotiating a salary for a new job with a new company versus if you are looking at an increase in salary in your existing organization, right? But either way, it's important to understand your measurable results, right? So I was responsible for creating this many impressions or this much revenue or this many sales or this percentage of growth or whatever that is. No kind of some measurable results that relate to the company's success that have been affected by or managed by or something by you. And then also remember, I think sometimes for me it's helpful to, it's not just, are you at 50,000 and you're trying to get to 75,000, right? Look at the full package. Think about it from the perspective of an employer, right? If I'm an employer, I'm going to go, okay, well, it's not just 50,000. I also pay these taxes and I pay your health insurance and I do a matching program for the 401k or whatever that is. So when you go in knowing the way they're thinking about their package that they've offered you. Because if you just go in and start, kind of starting from that 50,000, they're going to be like, wait, we actually do a lot more for you. So just kind of, I think it helps to go in with the full appreciation of what they're doing, and then know what you want, right? Know what you're willing to settle on, and then also know your walking away point. So I think that's really key to going into one of these conversations.
Yes, I absolutely agree with all of that. And that last point about what your walking away point is, you need to know how much you need to survive, especially if you're going to move somewhere, you need to know exactly what you need. And if they don't offer you that, then you have to walk away from that. There is some very unfortunate research about women negotiating for salary, that women who negotiate for money are seen as, more troublesome and whatever. The one way out of that is what Allison said, which is to say, this is what I've done for the organization. This is what I can do. If you put it in terms of, the other person's point of view, I kind of actually hate that, because guys can go in and just say, I'm worth this, and it's okay, but it is what it is. The other thing I really advise people is, when that question comes up about what was your past salary, that's not their business and it has no relevance to the position that you are negotiating. Do not answer that question, because it's one of the reasons why women earn less over their lifetime, because their new employer offers them a little bit more than their past salary. So stay quiet on that question.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I don't know if there are any rules surrounding that in California. That's something I will probably look into, but I know there are some that you can also discuss your salary with other employees. Your employer cannot punish you for that in the state of California. So, don't be afraid to ask your coworkers what they're making. They may not tell you, that's entirely up to them. But that's good for you as well to have a reference point, right? My male coworker in this position that I'm going to get promoted up to was being paid this much, right? And use that as kind of almost like a benchmark, right? Kind of work around that salary. You will too might have different experiences, different histories or levels of involvement with the company, but don't be afraid to ask others as well. You cannot be penalized for that.
Yeah. Sometimes I've needed to also remind someone who is in control of my salary, when they go, okay, well, we gave you a 5% bump and that's pretty average. I go, cool. But as we've already discussed, I'm not an average employee, right? And I'm bringing in above average results. So let's make sure we have something that's comparable to the work that you desire out of me.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Felicity, a question for you. If you don't want to, and you shouldn't, tell your salary to a potential employer, how do you say no?
You just say, I'm not comfortable answering that question. I'd rather not talk about, my private finances or whatever. But, don't duck it. Actually sort of say, look, I'd rather not answer that question. Because don't forget, you're also interviewing them, and if they're going to be assholes about it and try and pry it out of you, first of all, that they want to cheap you out. They want to pay you a little bit above that. Do you want to work for those people? No. So, just say, I'd rather not answer that question. I'm not comfortable answering that question, and, proceed from there.
Excellent.
And don't explain, right?
Yeah, no, don't, exactly. Yeah.
Put the proverbial duct tape over and just let it sit, right? Because especially as women, we want to be like, because it's not important. Like, don't explain it.
Yeah.
And same when you drop your number. Cool, this is what I'm looking for. Duct tape.
And I'll tell you, the worst thing that can happen to you is when you drop your number and their faces don't change. And what you realize is that you've just gone under what they were prepared to pay. Make sure you do your research. It's a really horrible moment where they suddenly think, oh, she's cheap.
But leave like your kids. I have 2 kids. I have to put them into privacy.
Yeah.
Leave all of that out of that room. It has no place, right? You were talking about your value at that company and nothing else.
Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah. They could say, you putting your kids in, that's not our responsibility as a company.
Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. So what about some other types of negotiations, business partnerships, strategic partnerships? Allison, I think you have some experience with that. Or how is that different than salary negotiation?
That's a really good question. I have to think for a second if that even in my mind is different than a salary negotiation. I was very fortunate. I'm founded Brenne myself. I put my own tiny little life savings into it. And then I was approached by Diageo and Remy, and then I made a partnership deal with a company called Samson Surrey. And I actually think I approached it very similarly. Like, I had really no problem telling Diageo their number was way off, or their offer was I took it as, okay, if I got someone's offer, right? Here's the job offer, or here's the deal offer, or something cool. Well, what's your hope out of this, right? What are you really, and know what they're buying. Are they just buying you? Are they buying a product? Are they buying something in as a package? And go, okay, well, if you're just doing a multiple on sales, or you're just looking at the bottom numbers, I'm also included in that, or you're also getting this, or you're also getting that. And then take it as an opportunity to ask them, okay, well, if you're not willing to strike this, then what do you really want? Like, what's the ultimate dream? This is where we are today, but how do you envision this going in 5 years or 10 years or whatever you need to do in the future? And then can you see how this clause or this thing could stifle innovation or stifle growth or stifle that? And so thus, if you have that, that's going to limit our ability to get to where we need to go together in partnership. And I've gotten a lot of things struck out of contracts in that way that gave me personally a lot more freedom to do maybe side projects or whatever else I wanted to do, but also it gave me a lot more freedom to work within the organization.
Excellent.
That was clear. It's hard to use a lot of like ifs, thens, theirs.
No, I really love what you said about kind of asking for the dream, right? going above and beyond, especially in these types of negotiations. And I think, Felicity, you have a story from an expert negotiator.
I do. One of the great things about being a journalist is all the people that you can interview. And some years ago, I interviewed a hostage negotiator. He's one of the world's top negotiators. And I said to him, how do you get what you want? And he said, whenever you have a meeting, make sure you speak first and ask for something outrageous. And then, you bargain down to where you really want. And actually, I had a problem with one of the jobs I was doing. I had a really serious problem with management about how I was doing things, and either they were going to fire me or I was going to walk. And we had this really, really unpleasant meeting, and I went into it and I was really shaky. And then I thought, what that guy told me? I have nothing to lose. We're at a make or break moment, so I'm going to try the thing. So I said, before we start the meeting, I would like to say, and I asked for loads more money and I asked for staff. And you know what? My then boss went, yeah, okay. And we didn't get to any of the unpleasant stuff. We spent the time talking about what kind of staff I needed. And I was like, why didn't I do this before? This is amazing.
Yeah, I just saw in the chats too. Was it Chris Voss from Never Split the Difference, and he has a masterclass?
No. It was somebody from Wharton. I actually can't remember the guy's name, but he'd actually liberated hostages, I think, in India or somewhere. So he knew what he was about. Oh, but he did say, and this is really important, he did say that there needs to be a power relationship. If you go into a negotiation and you have no power at all, don't try it. just don't even think about trying those sorts of games. So you have to have some leverage that the other person wants if you're going to do that.
Yeah. And I agree. You said something, and by the way, for those in the chats, I know you all are talking about Chris Voss. Never Split the Difference. His book is great. His masterclass is great. I've taken a lot from that. I think it's also really important, like what Felicity was saying, when you make that big ask, I already don't have the deal and my life is fine, right? Exactly. I already don't have that partnership. I already don't have. So I have no problem going in. I once did a deal and it was me and then it was 17 Japanese men. There was one woman in the room and she was the translator. And everyone was like, are you nervous? I said, no. And they're like, why not? I said, I already don't have the deal. The only thing that could possibly change in my life is that I get the deal. And I know life is so uncertain and so short. So I only really want to work with people who operate with a similar level of, respect and ethics and, find some fun in all of this. So if the negotiations, if you can't, like you said, Felicity, even when it's a salary, but even in business, you're also interviewing them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I think I want to work with you. I'm pitching you for your business, but the way we deal in this negotiation is really going to give me some key insights, because especially when I did my partnership, here we are in COVID, right? We're in an unprecedented time. I knew in my dealings with Remy, Diageo, and Samson and Surrey, who I would want to be sitting on the same side of the table with when things got terrible, right? When the shit hit the fan. And I think you have to also remember, when you go into negotiations, it's not just about you and your perceived value. Just go in with all your eyes open and be like, this is a key indicator to how business might be down the road with them in a partnership.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. Yeah.
Well, collaboration and communication will be 5 years from now, 2 years from now, however long it is. Yeah. All right. I do want to be mindful. Oh, sorry, Allison, go ahead.
I was just going to say that can actually be fun, right? I know we think, negotiation or salary or it's like, you can have some fun with this.
Yeah, really great negotiators actually treat it like a game. As I discovered in China, I'd been to a spa and they charged me $500 for something that should have been $100. So I was trying to get my money back, and we had this dispute that was brokered by the concierge from the hotel. And this woman, it was hilarious. She was like, we had to charge you that much money because your skin is terrible, and because, it took more people, and the products we had to use on your terrible face cost money. And actually, it was just a game. It really was.
Amazing.
Oh man, well, we're getting close to our end time, unfortunately, even though I could laugh and talk to the two of you all day long. I do want to be mindful of questions. So if you have some that you hadn't asked before, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. Rebecca, you want to read off some of those questions, please?
Yeah, and just a reminder that if we don't get to your question on air now, we will follow up with this panel via email, and we will get that out to you with the recording at the end of the week. So our first question is related to emotion. How do you respond to someone who says that your emotion is because you're female?
You punch them.
That's much kinder than what was running through my mind.
You go, I'm sorry? Do you want to say that again? Yeah, no, that's an underhand tactic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't even. I mean, your emotion is because you're like, okay, it's. I don't know. I mean, like, also, what's wrong with emotion?
Yeah.
And everyone has emotion. Otherwise, you're not. Do you want a robot doing my job? We don't want. I don't know.
I've had some mixed success with this. Quite often I'll just stop, take a breath, and say my emotion is because I'm passionate, not because I'm a woman, and just leave it at that, and then kept moving forward.
Yeah.
Okay, so if somebody says to you, you're emotional like a woman, that is just out and out misogyny. However, there is a inappropriateness about emotion, especially around, things like tears can actually be a form of manipulation. So if you find that you're getting really emotional, take time out. And also, I don't know, I go back to this idea about rehearsing conversations and stuff. It's actually not professional to get really teary in a work thing. And if you're doing it a lot, you should ask yourself whether you have a depression or something that's affecting you, because it's an unusual problem to have, I think. Not to say emotions are bad, right? I'm not saying that, but they are not. Some types of emotions are not particularly appropriate in the workplace.
Beautifully said. Yeah.
Just practice.
Practice, yes.
Yeah, especially when you're working on like showing up differently or communicating, like if you're trying a new communication style for yourself, just remember you kind of have to create a new neural pathway. And just reading it or even saying it internally is going to be very, very different than when it comes out of your mouth. And you don't want necessarily the first time you're trying something new or the first time you're saying something out loud to be in that negotiation or in that hard moment or in that moment of conflict, right? It's better to start trying it with those who are living under the same roof as you, like if you read Chris Voss's book, he does it seems like, instead of, wow, you're really mad right now. Oh, you seem really mad right now. Or, oh, it seems like you're really enjoying cooking. There's ways to start practicing some of these techniques in really unheated moments.
Okay, so somebody's in the comments has just said, what is the answer when somebody says you're emotional because you're a woman? So first of all, that's a completely inappropriate thing for them to say. One thing you can do is you can either, I actually don't know how I would deal with that, because I find that such an inappropriate thing to say. I would actually be gobsmacked if somebody said that to me. But I suppose what I would say is what do you mean? I would ask them to identify exactly what they mean. I always think the answer to lots of problems is to stick to the thing in hand. Saying things like you're emotional like you're a woman can sometimes just be a derailing tactic. Just stick to the subject and keep sticking to the subject.
Yeah,
I agree.
I think this is proving that this is a really hard thing to do, and we are put in an absolutely terrible position because somebody says this and now it's on us. Yeah. So they say something completely inappropriate and now it's back on us to get it, back to where we were, on track, whatever, and to deal with it. And it's not fair, right? I mean, the three of us are all, Felicity, I love your term, gobsmacked. So we're having this discussion. It's terrible. Yeah. But I do love your points. I do think just taking a breath and not immediately reacting, which would be, what I would love to do in a perfect world. You said punch. I have some curse words running through my head right now. But those were some great tactics. Put it back on them. Ask them.
The other thing about difficult conversations is there's actually a body of research that has looked at how people go into difficult conversations. And what we do as humans, and possibly it's for evolutionary reasons, is we think of the worst case scenario. So we rehearse in our head the worst thing that could happen when we go into that conversation. And what that actually does is it sets us up to have a really bad conversation. Whereas the reality is that most people don't want drama. Most people want to come to a resolution. And in wine, most people are decent people. So if you can keep that in mind, that they don't want to have a fight, unless they're an asshole, in which case it's a different thing. But most people don't want to have a fight with you. And if you can keep that in mind, that can also help to lower the temperature.
Yeah. And if there is someone with whom you're having repeated challenges, right? If you're trying and you just keep getting those types of comments, you might need to bring in HR or someone above them or something. You have to be a little bit conscious that that's not necessarily entirely on you, but
yeah, that's true.
Great. We have another question. When should you stop or end a conversation?
That's a really good question. I'm not very good at that. I tend to go, thank you, and then I leave people upset. I'm not the right person to answer this. Allison.
Yeah, I think again, I mean, it's all situational. It depends on everything that's going on. And sometimes if you've set it up, right, we have an hour to talk, sometimes timing just dictates when the end is. And it is very common if the end is there and it's still not resolved. Cool, okay, so these 3 points are still outstanding. I think we've agreed that we're gonna have continued conversations on this other thing. Can we set up a time to talk about the other 2? Right, and it is okay to also be in a place and not have come to full resolve. And honestly, sometimes I've gone into really hard conversations, like Felicity said, sometimes all you think about is the worst case scenario. In that, if I find that, or especially when I'm going into a really hard conversation, I will intentionally think of the worst case scenario, like what's the worst possible reaction they could have? And then I jot 3 things down about that. And then I go back to the other side of it, right? Of being proactive. Because if they do say the worst thing, I also don't want to be, I want to be able to have a response. And maybe it's just, oh, okay, well, if that's going to be the current reality, then that's a different conversation that we need to have. Maybe we have time now, or maybe we can regroup in 2 days or whatever that is. Yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah. I've said,
sorry. You know, when you're interviewing people, people get a full head of steam and they want to keep talking. How do you get out of it? How do you get up and walk away?
I've just said, you know, I think that we're starting to, the conversation's getting a little bit derailed here. We're going off topic. Let's try to bring it back. And if that doesn't work, then I've just said, you know what, let's try this again another day. As politely as I can. I say, you know what, we've been at this for an hour, you know, let's come in with a clear head and try it again tomorrow or whenever the next possible day is. And that's worked really well. I have never just got up and left an interview, though I have wanted to a couple of times, but I've just used those tactics. Yeah.
And a final question here, Erin. You mentioned earlier in the session a bit about the tool that your company is using. Can you share the name of that tool you used in your company to assess communication styles?
Yeah, it's HBDI. I'm not entirely sure what that stands for, but essentially it breaks all of us up into 4 colors, red, yellow, green, blue. I'm a green. I'm very practical, planning oriented. So when I come into a conversation, I'm straight to the point, and it's less, okay, let's talk about what this decision means. I think about how do we make this happen, right? Okay, so we've decided we're going to do this conference. Great. What days do we need to have the session plan in? Whereas somebody else who is, say, a yellow is thinking about overarching quality and, you know, what need are we fulfilling? What is the point of all of this, right? And so that you need all of those colors in an organization. You need all of those communication and decision-making styles in an organization in order to make a strong company. So it's learning what each person on your team's strength is and kind of playing to that, right?
Can I add one thing also for those who might be on this call who are the drag the baggers, right? Like we are like the street champs, the wine in the bag, doing all the sales, going to accounts and trying to sell in your products. I think I've heard a lot of people who go, oh, I have my sales pitch. And exactly, Erin, to your point, I make sure that our sales pitch is broken down into archetypes of buyers, right? Some buyers want the story and the price. Some want the technical thing and the price. Some want to know what it pairs with or how to drink it and the price, right? So, and then some want all of it. And so I break down and I train my sales team. If you walk in and you have one of these 4 buyers, this is how to take the same story, but break it down into a way that they're going to be able to really receive that. And then you might possibly get a better win. And also I take it one step further. When I train restaurant staff on our brands, on our products, I do the same thing. I'll do a like a 4x4 of a grid per product. And if you have a customer who is story, technical, how to drink, or special occasion or some like fun fact or something, I just quickly 3 bullets per thing, right? People can't usually remember more than 3 bullets. So just what are your 3 bullets, and just frame your sales pitch based on archetype, and you can really get a lot more wins that way.
Absolutely.
I have nothing to add to that. That's great.
I mean, it kind of works in interviewing too, right? You know, some people, when you interview them or you need to get something out of them, you just have to go straight to it and you have to ask the hard question. Others, you have to say, tell me about your childhood, which is, you know, the J school, like the initial question you learn, right? Tell me about how you grew up, get to know them, learn them a little bit. And it helps build some of that trust, right? That you're speaking on their level, right? You're communicating to them, and they're more likely and willing to give you information to help you to whatever it is you're seeking.
Yeah. The other thing, I mean, don't use this is a bad thing, all right? I'm just putting it in as trivia. Do not use this, all right? But the other thing that there's a lot of research about is flattery. The more confident that somebody is and the more powerful they are, the more that you can slop flattery all over them and they will really, really like you. And the more insecure that they are, stay away from flattery because it'll make them suspicious of you. So if you come across somebody who's really, really confident and you want to kiss up to them, but don't do it, right? Don't do it.
I like this, what to do, what not to do.
Yeah.
Excellent. Rebecca, any more questions?
We're going to go ahead and plan to wrap there. We promise to get those answered and sent out.
I just want to say thank you, Felicity. Thank you, Allison, for participating in this conversation today. I think the 3 of us love to communicate and are happy to continue to do so. I know if anybody has any follow-up questions, I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. I really love this community and what Bâtonnage is all about. So thank you to the founders and thank you to the organizers for having us today. I'm immensely humbled. Thank you.
Yeah, it's been great. And thank you so much. It's been a really interesting conversation for me as well. I've learned a lot.
Me too. And feel free to reach out to me on Instagram also, or LinkedIn. I'll happy to continue this conversation. And thank you both. This was really fun.
Thank you, ladies. That was an epic panel. And as Rebecca said, you know, we'll send out an email with a recap and get some of these other questions answered. Thank you to you 3 for all being here. And thank you, obviously, to our participants and attendees. So just a little bit about next week. It's our final week for Bâtonnage Connect, and we've got 3 breakout sessions. So Money Talks, Are You Listening? Is on Wednesday, July 8th at 10 a.m. Pacific. Advancing Your Career is on Thursday, and that's July 9th at 10 a.m. And then we're going to wrap it up with another The Fizz is Female panel on Friday, July 10th at 1 p.m. So we're going to close it down with some bubbly. So thank you all again, and we'll see you next week.